It is a historical truism that power rarely evaporates. It is not a liquid that dries under the sun of public scrutiny. It is instead a solid state until it isn't, until the structural integrity of the container itself begins to groan under a weight it was never designed to hold. For decades, we operated under the assumption that the lines on the map were etched in something more permanent than ink. We believed that the never again of the mid-10th century was a binding contract, a physical law of the democratic universe. But tonight we have to look at the cracks. We have to look at the unsettling contradiction of a peace plan that reads like a ledger of liquidation. We have to ask why. At the very moment, the Kremlin's foundation is arguably at its most brittle point in a generation. The pressure is being released not from the inside, but from the outside. Tonight, a shocking revelation from the 47th President of the United States has turned the geopolitical chessboard into a crime scene. And the question hanging in the air, the one that should keep every advocate of a free society awake, is this. Is this a diplomatic breakthrough, or is it the controlled demolition of the world as we know it? To understand the desperation currently radiating from the red walls of the Kremlin, you have to look past the staged optics of the year-end press conference held just hours ago. You have to look at the math. In Moscow, they are calling it a conscious cooling. That is the official euphemism for an economy that is currently redlining at a 16.5% interest rate, a desperate attempt to throttle an inflationary monster born of military Keynesianism. When you shift an entire G20 economy to a guns-over-butter footing, you don't just change the budget, you change the cellular structure of the nation. We are seeing the emergence of what analysts are now calling the Time of Heroes initiative. This isn't just a recruitment slogan. This is a structural purge. Vladimir Putin is systematically replacing the technocratic, liberal, adjacent old guard, the people who actually know how to run a globalized economy with combat veterans. He is installing a new class of hero loyalists into the administrative bedrock of the state. Why? Because you don't need economists when you are preparing for a permanent state of siege. You need wardens. But here is the friction. The strategic initiative Putin claimed today, the boast of seizing settlements like Syver and Kupiansk, comes at a cost that is no longer sustainable through rhetoric alone. The Kremlin is facing a demographic cliff. With unemployment at a record low 2%, there is no one left to work the factories because they are either at the front in the ground or have fled across the border. This is the pressure cooker effect. The Russian state is cannibalizing its own future to feed a present that is increasingly defined by tactical stagnation. And yet, despite this internal fracturing, despite the reports of dissenting voices within state corporations like Rostec, where the loss of international markets has created a simmering fury among the elite, the Kremlin remains defiant. They are betting on a singular variable. They are betting that the resolve of the West is more brittle than the Russian ruble. They are looking at the cracks in the democratic facade and seeing an opportunity to redefine the very concept of victory. This is not merely about a territorial dispute in Eastern Europe. This is about the survival of an autocratic model that requires the total subversion of the international order to justify its own domestic failures. If you can't provide prosperity, you must provide the illusion of empire. And tonight we have evidence that this illusion is being bolstered by the most unlikely of architects. Because while the Kremlin was projecting an image of iron-willed stability, a document was being finalized thousands of miles away. A document that would effectively grant Putin in everything he has failed to win on the battlefield. On the afternoon of the 20th of December 2025, the narrative of the last 4 years didn't just shift, it was decapitated. President Donald Trump, speaking from the Oval Office, delivered what can only be described as a rhetorical surrender disguised as a common-sense observation. His words were, well, they've already lost the territory, to be honest. Think about the weight of that sentence. It is the verbal erasure of international law. It is the 47th President of the United States preemptively validating the illegal seizure of sovereign land by a foreign adversary. But the shocking part isn't just the rhetoric. It's the mechanism of the betrayal. We have obtained further details on the 28-point peace plan that emerged from the Alaska summit. This is not a negotiation. It is a liquidation. The plan proposes the creation of economic free zones in the occupied territories, a polite term for a colonial extraction framework where the sovereignty of the victim is traded for the mineral rights of the aggressor. But here is the escalation you need to pay attention to. The new national security strategy released by the Trump administration has officially removed Russia from the list of direct adversaries. In one stroke of a pen, the decadal-long consensus on the threat posed by Moscow's expansionism has been discarded. The strategy frames Russia not as a predator to be contained, but as a partner in regional stability. This is the big reveal of the 2025 pivot. The administration is pushing for a neutrality for Ukraine that includes a cap on its armed forces to 600 troops, effectively making it a vassal state incapable of self-defense. And the amnesty clause, it covers all parties. It is a blank check for war crimes, a global signal that the Geneva Convention is now a legacy document with no enforcement mechanism in the new transactional era. We are watching the dismantling of the post-1945 security architecture in real time. The Alaska framework isn't about ending a war. It's about ending an era. It's about a world where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. All mediated by a real estate logic that views national borders as negotiable leases. The Kremlin is in turmoil. Yes, Putin is facing critical decisions. Yes, but he is facing them with the knowledge that the leader of the free world is currently acting as his primary defense attorney. The shocking revelation isn't that a deal is being made. It's that the deal was written in the language of the aggressor, translated into English and presented as American diplomacy. If we step back from the granular details of interest rates and 28-point plans, the picture that emerges is one of a global moral realignment. We are witnessing a strategic decoupling of the United States from its traditional role as the guarantor of democratic norms. The lens through which we must view these developments is no longer geopolitics in the traditional sense. It is the lens of an existential struggle between two irreconcilable systems of human organization. On one side, a system based on the rule of law, the sanctity of borders, and the inherent right of a people to choose their own destiny. On the other, a new autocratic order that prioritizes the stability of the elite, the suppression of dissent, and the transactional partitioning of the globe into spheres of influence. The propaganda victory being claimed by the Kremlin tonight is not a military one, it is an ideological one. They have successfully moved the goalposts of the international conversation. We are no longer talking about how to restore the territorial integrity of a democracy. We are talking about the economic viability of an economic free zone under the shadow of a foreign occupier. The policy failures here are staggering. By legitimizing Putin's time of heroes and validating his internal purges, the current administration is effectively subsidizing the survival of a regime that was on the verge of a structural heart attack. They are providing the oxygen of legitimacy to a system that was choking on its own corruption and military incompetence. This is the hidden motive. This is the power game gone wrong. This isn't a peace plan. It's a preservation plan for the concept of the strongman. It is a signal to every aspiring autocrat from the South China Sea to the heart of Europe that if you hold out long enough, if you are brutal enough, if you are willing to wreck your own economy for the sake of a territorial fetish, the West will eventually come to you with a pen and a map and a request to just make it work. The moral weight of this moment cannot be overstated. We are choosing to live in a world where the big reveal is that there are no rules, only deals. Where the strategic miscalculation is the belief that you can trade a piece of a democracy for a moment of peace and not lose the soul of both in the process. If the first 3 chapters of this unfolding crisis were about the Kremlin's rot and the transactional maneuvers of the Alaska summit, then the 4th chapter, The one we are living through at this very hour is about the quiet, systematic dismantling of the institutional machinery that was built to prevent exactly this kind of collapse. To understand the stakes of the Trump administration's 2025 national security strategy, you have to understand that a superpower does not just exert force through its military. It exerts force through its consistency. It exerts force through the predictability of its moral commitments. When the administration quietly released its national security strategy earlier this month, it wasn't just another policy document. It was a formal declaration of strategic bankruptcy. For the first time in the modern era, the United States has produced a foundational security text that does not merely ignore the threat posed by Moscow. It actively seeks to rehabilitate the aggressor into the fold of global stability. This is the late-night whimper that Jonathan Hall at the LSC noted. A document that looks, feels, and reads like a domestic political manifesto rather than a global doc. The shift is not subtle. By removing Russia from the list of primary strategic rivals and pivoting entirely toward hemispheric concerns like migration, the administration is not just rebalancing our priorities. They are pulling the plug on the defensive grid of the Western world. They are telling our allies in Tallinn, in Warsaw, and in Berlin that the Article 5 guarantee, the very bedrock of the NATO alliance, is now subject to the same real estate logic that governs a hotel lease. But the rot goes deeper than the paper it's written on. We have to look at the people. Look at the appointment of Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the influence of Jared Kushner in these shadow negotiations with the Kremlin. We are seeing the sidelining of the professional diplomatic corps, the men and women who have spent decades studying the nuances of Eastern European security in favor of a loyalty first circle of private sector dealmakers. This is the American version of Putin's time of heroes. Just as the Kremlin is replacing technocrats with combat veterans to ensure ideological purity, the Trump administration is replacing career public servants with transactional loyalists to ensure that no institutional memory or moral friction can slow down the great transaction. This is the strategic failure that the propaganda will never admit. By hollowed out our own institutions, we are becoming the very thing we once fought to contain. We are adopting a model where policy is dictated by the personal whims of the leader, where stability is achieved through the abandonment of principles, and where the big reveal is that the United States is no longer interested in being the leader of the free world. It is instead interested in being a senior partner in a global syndicate of strong men. The consequences of this institutional erosion are already being felt. In Brussels, there is a palpable sense of panic. European leaders are now openly discussing unprecedented steps to fill the vacuum left by Washington. They are realizing that the American security umbrella has become a security sieve. And the irony, the dark, controlled irony that we must confront, is that by seeking to bring peace through this 28-point plan, the administration is actually inviting a much larger, much more chaotic conflict. Because when you signal that boundaries are negotiable and that war crimes can be amnestied, you don't end the war. You just lower the cost of starting the next one. This is the propaganda victory tone that the Kremlin is currently broadcasting to its domestic audience. They aren't just celebrating the gain of territory in the Donbass. They are celebrating the surrender of the American mind. They are watching a superpower dismantle its own defensive architecture from the inside out. They're watching as the leader of the 47th presidency uses the language of common sense to justify the liquidation of a democracy. And let's be very clear about the moral weight of this transformation. This isn't just about a change in administration. It's about a change in our national character. It's about whether we are still a nation that believes in the rules-based order, or if we have become a nation that is willing to trade the freedom of others for a brief shivering moment of isolationist peace. The strategic miscalculation here isn't just a matter of foreign policy. It's a matter of who we are. As we move toward the final verdict of this evening, we have to look at the hidden motives that drive a policy of such profound retreat. Is it a genuine belief in isolationism, or is it something more transactional, something that involves the economic free zones and the mineral rights that were discussed in Alaska? The power games gone wrong are not just happening in the halls of the Kremlin. They're happening in the West Wing, and the casualty of these games isn't just a piece of Ukrainian land. It's the very idea that a democracy can rely on the word of its greatest ally, the big reveal that is now staring us in the face. The one that connects the internal decay of the Russian state to the strategic abdication of the American one is that both systems are currently being hollowed out by leaders who view the world not as a community of nations, but as a marketplace for the powerful. And in that marketplace, the one thing that is not for sale, sovereignty, is the very thing being traded away. If you look closely at the fine print of the national security strategy released just 2 weeks ago, and specifically at the section curiously titled Promoting European Greatness, you find a rhetorical turn that is so aggressive, so dripping with ideological venom that it sounds less like a policy document and more like a manifesto for a cross-border political insurrection. The administration is no longer just deprioritizing Europe. It is accusing our oldest allies of being the architects of their own civilizational eraser. This is the NATO-style, unsettling contradiction we have to sit with tonight. While the 47th President of the United States claims to be saving Western civilization from its own unstable minority governments and transnational bodies, he is simultaneously handing the keys of that civilization's security to the man currently trying to burn it down. The NSS actually calls for cultivating resistance within Europe, effectively encouraging far-right nationalist movements to bypass their own capitals and deal directly with Washington. It is a divide-and-conquer strategy applied to our own family. And the beneficiary of this friction is exactly who you think it is. But we have to follow the money because in this new order, ideology is often just the decorative wrapping for a ledger. We have obtained new insights into the economic cooperation that was whispered about during the Alaska summit, a component the Kremlin refers to as the Mineral Stabilization Clause. It turns out the Donbas, the very territory the president says is already lost, contains one of the largest lithium deposits in the world. By recognizing Russia's economic free zones in these regions, we aren't just ending a war. We are facilitating a massive resource transfer. We are essentially allowing the Kremlin to act as a middleman for the materials that will power the 21st century green economy. It's not a peace deal. It's a commodities flip. And here is the big reveal regarding the domestic stability Putin thinks he's buying with this deal. Our investigation into the Time of Heroes initiative has uncovered a terrifying shadow side. It isn't just a retraining program for veterans. It is the creation of a decentralized state-sanctioned paramilitary class. While Putin claims these men are being groomed to replace the liberal technocratic elite, the internal Ministry of Finance data shows a staggering expenditure on casualty payments that is effectively bankrupting regional budgets. These are the Black Widow's payments and the hero stipends that are keeping the Russian interior from exploding. But what happens when the war stops? This is the strategic miscalculation that keeps the intelligence community up at night. If a peace is brokered that leaves 700,000 traumatized, heavily armed, and ideologically radicalized men with no front line to fight on, they don't just go back to fixing tractors. They become a Taurian guard without a Caesar to protect. By stabilizing Putin's regime through this Alaska deal, the United States is essentially financing the creation of a global mercenary reserve that will inevitably be exported to Mali, Syria, and Venezuela. We are paying for the construction of a monster that will eventually come for our own interests in the global south. The narrative of civilizational eraser is the ultimate projection. The administration claims the European Union is the threat to Western values even as they dismantle the rules. based order that defined those values for 80 years. They frame the surrender of Ukraine as a tough but necessary transaction. While the real transaction is the abandonment of the idea that a nation's sovereignty is not a commodity to be traded for mineral rights. This is the propaganda victory in its purest form, making the public believe that the destruction of an alliance is an act of cultivating greatness, making us believe that a good deal for a handful of extraction industries is a great deal for the American people. The moral pressure of this moment is the realization that once you accept the logic of spheres of influence, you have already lost the competition. You have admitted that you are no longer a leader, but just another landlord. But there is one final piece of this puzzle, a piece that was left out of the official press briefings in Alaska and omitted from the footnotes of the NSS. It is a secret protocol regarding the reintegration of the global financial system, and it suggests that the pirate jurisdiction Putin railed against today is exactly where the dealmakers are planning to store their winnings. The final segment of this investigation takes us into the darkest corner of the Alaska framework, a corner that the administration has gone to great lengths to keep off the record. It concerns a side letter on the reintegration of Russian banking into the SWIFT system, not as a reward for peace, but as a prerequisite for the economic free zones to function. This is the hidden motive that explains the rush, the creation of a parallel financial loop that is immune to future sanctions, a sanctions-proof corridor that connects the mineral wealth of the Donbas directly to the offshore accounts of the new global elite. When we talk about strategic failure, we usually talk about lost territory or failed offensives. But the true failure here is the total evaporation of American deterrence.